In the shadowed corridors of Ravensholm Palace, where centuries of secrets whisper through tapestried halls, a single piece of jewelry holds the power to shatter a kingdom. When Princess Alina's dying wish becomes a royal decree, 3 lives collide in a battle that will determine not just who wears the crown, but who controls the very soul of the realm. The autumn rain drummed against the ancient windows of Ravensholm Palace as Queen Isabel stood before the ornate mirror in her private chambers, her reflection fractured by the antique glass. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the sapphire ring that had adorned her finger for 37 years. The Tear of Avalon, they called it. A stone so blue it seemed to hold the very essence of the ocean, surrounded by diamonds that caught light like captured stars. Tonight, everything would change. The ring had been Elena's before it became hers, Princess Elena, the beloved first wife of King Marcus, who had died tragically in a carriage accident when their son, Prince Alexander, was barely 12 years old. Elena had been the people's darling, a woman who walked among commoners with genuine warmth, who established hospitals for the poor and schools for orphaned children. When she died, the entire kingdom mourned as if they had lost their own mother. Isabel had never meant to fall in love with Marcus. She had come to court as Elena's lady-in-waiting, a minor noble's daughter from the countryside who possessed little more than grace, intelligence, and an unfortunate tendency toward honesty. But grief had a way of breaking down walls, and in the dark months following Elena's death, Marcus had found solace in Isabel's steady presence. Their marriage 2 years later had been political necessity wrapped in genuine affection, but the kingdom never forgot who came first. The ring had been Marcus's wedding gift to Isabel, though she knew it pained him to see Elena's most precious possession on another woman's hand. He had insisted, claiming it was tradition, but Isabel understood the truth. The Tear of Avalon was more than jewelry. It was a symbol of legitimacy, of the crown's blessing, of worthiness to stand beside a king. Now, as the years had carved lines into her face and silver into her dark hair, Isabel faced a challenge she had long dreaded. Prince Alexander, now 35 and heir to the throne, was finally ready to marry. Lady Victoria Harrington, daughter of the Duke of Westmere, was everything a future queen should be: beautiful, educated, politically connected, and possessed of that particular brand of cold ambition that royal life required. The problem was not Victoria herself, but what she represented. Alexander had made his intentions clear during their private dinner 3 nights prior. He wanted his mother to pass the ring to his bride, as was traditional. But buried in his request was an undertone that made Isabel's blood chill. The suggestion that perhaps it was time for the ring to return to its rightful lineage. Isabel had spent decades proving herself worthy of her position, transforming from a nervous girl into a queen who commanded respect through intelligence and determination. She had borne Marcus 2 more children, Princess Catherine and Prince James, and had guided the kingdom through plague, famine, and war. Yet in Alexander's eyes, she remained the usurper, the woman who had taken his mother's place and now wore his mother's ring. The heavy oak door to her chambers creaked open, and Marcus entered without announcing himself. At 68, he remained distinguished despite the weight of crown and years. His dark hair had gone completely silver, and deep lines bracketed his mouth, but his green eyes still held the warmth that had first drawn her to him. "You look troubled," he said, settling into the chair beside her dressing table. His own trouble showed in the set of his shoulders. The kingdom faced mounting pressures from neighboring realms, and Parliament grew increasingly bold in their demands for reform. The crown's authority, once absolute, now required constant negotiation. "Alexander came to see me again today," Isabel said, meeting her husband's gaze in the mirror. "About the ring." Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "What did you tell him?" "The same thing I told him before, that the decision is mine to make." She turned to face him directly. "But he's not accepting that answer anymore, Marcus. He's begun making inquiries about the ring's history, its legal ownership. He's building a case." "The ring belongs to the crown," Marcus said firmly. "As my wife and queen, you have every right to wear it and to decide its fate." "We both know it's more complicated than that. Elena's will specifically mention the ring. She wanted it to go to her son's bride when he married. Elena's will also left everything to my discretion as king and widower," Marcus countered. "I chose to give it to you. And now Alexander questions that choice." Isabel stood and walked to the window, watching the rain streak down the glass like tears. "He's not wrong, you know. Elena was beloved in a way I never have been, never could be. The people still speak her name with reverence. They see me as what? As the replacement. The second choice, the woman who stepped into a dead woman's shoes and tried to make them fit." Marcus rose and crossed to her, placing gentle hands on her shoulders. "You are not Elena's replacement. You are my choice, my partner, my queen. You have proven yourself 1,000 times over. Isabel leaned back against his chest, drawing comfort from his solid presence. Have I, though? Or have I simply been acceptable? Good enough for a king who needed a mother for his children and a partner for his reign? Isabel. Marcus's voice held gentle reproach. You know better than that. Do I? She turned in his arms. Alexander has made it clear that he sees Victoria as more suitable to wear Elena's ring than I am. He's not entirely wrong. Victoria comes from pure nobility, with no questions about her worthiness or her place. She won't spend her reign defending her right to exist. Alexander is young and idealistic. He sees the world in absolutes that don't exist in real life. He's also the future king, and he's questioning my legitimacy. Isabel pulled away, walking to her jewelry box. Perhaps it's time to consider that he might be right. Marcus followed her, his expression darkening. You would give up the ring, after all these years? I would give it to its rightful owner. She opened the box, revealing an array of royal jewels, each piece carrying its own weight of history and expectation. Elena meant it for her son's bride. Maybe honoring that wish would finally put the questions to rest. Or maybe it would confirm every doubt anyone has ever had about your place in this family. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with truth neither wanted to acknowledge. Isabel had spent decades walking a tightrope between respect and resentment, between acceptance and accusation. Every decision she made was weighed against what Elena might have done. Every charitable work was compared to Elena's legendary compassion. Every public appearance was measured against the memory of a woman who had died young and beautiful and beloved. There's something else, Marcus said quietly. Something you need to know about Alexander's recent investigations. Isabel's stomach clenched. What kind of investigations? He's been asking questions about the accident. About Elena's death. The room seemed to grow colder. Elena's carriage accident had been thoroughly investigated at the time. A wheel had broken on a rain-slicked road, sending the carriage tumbling into a ravine. The driver had been killed instantly. Elena had lived long enough to be brought back to the palace, but her injuries were too severe. She had died holding Marcus's hand, whispering something that only he had heard. What kind of questions? Isabel forced herself to ask. About the carriage's maintenance, about who had access to it, about whether anyone might have had reason to ensure the accident occurred. Isabel sank into her chair, the implications crashing over her like a wave. He suspects murder. He suspects something. And if he's looking for someone to blame, someone who benefited from Elena's death, Marcus didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. He thinks I killed her. The words came out as barely a whisper. He thinks I murdered his mother to steal her husband and her crown. We don't know what he thinks, but his inquiries are attracting attention. There are whispers in court, questions being asked by people who should know better. Isabel felt the walls of her carefully constructed life beginning to crumble. She had built her reputation brick by brick, proving her worth through actions and dedication. But accusations of murder would destroy everything in moments. Even if proven false, the stain would never completely wash away. What did Elena whisper to you when she was dying? She asked suddenly. You never told me. Marcus hesitated, and in that hesitation, Isabel saw confirmation of her deepest fears. It doesn't matter now. It matters to me. It matters to Alexander. What did she say? Oh, for a long moment, Marcus was silent. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he said. She asked me to protect you. I was just her lady-in-waiting then. We barely knew each other beyond formal duties. Elena was perceptive. She saw how you looked at me, how I had begun to look at you. She knew what would happen after she was gone, and she knew how the court would react. Marcus's voice grew heavy with old pain. She made me promise to protect you from the whispers, from the accusations. She said you were good and kind, and that you would make me happy if I let you. Tears burned Isabel's eyes. Even dying, Elena had shown more grace and wisdom than anyone could expect. She had blessed a relationship that hadn't even begun yet, trying to shield a rival from the very accusations that were now, decades later, finally surfacing. Alexander doesn't know about our last words, Isabel said. No. And I've never told anyone else. But if these accusations continue, if he keeps investigating... She met Marcus's gaze. You'll have to choose between protecting me and protecting your son. It won't come to that, won't it? Isabel stood, walking to the window again. He's the future king, Marcus, if he believes I murdered his mother. If he decides to act on that belief, he has no proof because there is no proof. You did nothing wrong. I benefited from her death. I married her husband, wore her ring, raised her children. In the eyes of many, that's guilt enough. Marcus crossed to her, taking her hands in his. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe it's time to give him what he wants. The ring, my abdication from public life, removal of any threat I might pose to his future reign. Her voice grew stronger as the decision crystallized. Perhaps it's time for Queen Isabel to disappear, leaving only Lady Isabel, the minor noble's daughter who knew her place. I won't let you sacrifice yourself to appease his suspicions, and I won't let your son tear apart the kingdom because he can't accept his stepmother's legitimacy. She pulled her hands free, moving to the jewelry box. The ring goes to Victoria. I'll announce my intention to step back from public duties after Alexander's coronation. I'll become what I perhaps should have been all along, a king's beloved companion, rather than a queen in her own right. Isabel, no. It's already decided. She lifted the Tear of Avalon from its velvet bed, watching the sapphire catch the lamplight. Tomorrow, I'll send word to Alexander that he can arrange the transfer ceremony whenever he chooses. The ring returns to Elena's bloodline, and I return to the shadows where I belong. Marcus stared at her, pain and admiration warring in his expression. You're the strongest person I know. You shouldn't have to hide that strength to keep the peace. Strength sometimes means knowing when to retreat. She closed the jewelry box with a soft click. Elena's final gift to me was her blessing. Perhaps my final gift to Alexander can be his mother's ring and his peace of mind. As if summoned by their conversation, a sharp knock echoed through the chamber. Marcus frowned. Visits this late were unusual and generally brought bad news. Enter, he called. The door opened to reveal Captain Thomas Ashworth, head of the palace guard. His usually impeccable uniform showed signs of haste and his weathered face was grim. Your Majesties, forgive the intrusion, but there's been a development. Isabel's heart began to race. What kind of development? Prince Alexander has requested an immediate audience with both of you. He's in the throne room with Lady Victoria and... Ashworth hesitated. With Master Benedict Crowley. Crowley was the kingdom's most skilled investigator, a man who could uncover secrets buried so deep most people forgot they existed. If Alexander had brought him into this matter, it meant he was no longer simply asking questions. He was building a formal case. What does he want? Isabel asked, though she suspected she already knew. He wouldn't say, Your Majesty, but he did ask me to ensure that no one leaves the palace tonight without his express permission. The implication was clear. Alexander wasn't requesting an audience. He was demanding a confrontation. And he had taken steps to ensure that whatever truth he thought he had discovered, it wouldn't escape these walls. Isabel looked at Marcus, seeing her own resignation reflected in his eyes. The careful life they had built together, the delicate balance they had maintained for decades was about to crumble. Whether Alexander had proof or merely suspicion, the accusation alone would change everything. Tell my son we'll be down presently, Marcus said finally. Ashworth bowed and departed, leaving them alone with the weight of approaching judgment. Isabel walked to her wardrobe, selecting a simple black dress, appropriate for mourning, which seemed fitting for the death of her identity as queen. Whatever happens, Marcus said as she changed, remember that I chose you. Not out of necessity, not out of loneliness, but because I loved you. That's never changed. And whatever happens, she replied, fastening the dress's simple clasps, remember that I never regretted accepting your choice, even knowing the price I would pay for it. As they prepared to face Alexander's accusations, neither spoke the fear that haunted both their thoughts. That the truth Elena had whispered in her dying moments might not be enough to save them from her son's need for justice. The Tear of Avalon sat in its box, waiting to fulfill its destiny, to crown a new queen, or to destroy the woman who had dared to wear it. The throne room of Ravensholm Palace had witnessed centuries of triumph and tragedy, but as Queen Isabel entered with King Marcus at her side, she felt the weight of history pressing down upon her like never before. The vast chamber stretched before them, its vaulted ceilings disappearing into shadows that seemed to writhe with accusation. Massive tapestries depicting the kingdom's greatest victories hung from stone walls, but tonight they felt more like shrouds than celebrations. Prince Alexander stood before the twin thrones, his tall frame rigid with purpose. At 35, he possessed his father's strong features but his mother's gentle eyes. Eyes that now burned with a cold fire that made Isabel's breath catch. Beside him stood Lady Victoria Harrington, her blonde hair gleaming in the torchlight like spun gold, Her blue silk gown a deliberate echo of royal colors. She was beautiful in the way that noble breeding produced. Perfect features, flawless posture, and an air of entitlement that needed no words to announce itself. But it was the third figure in the room that sent ice through Isabel's veins. Master Benedict Crowley stood slightly apart from the royal couple, his thin frame draped in the dark robes that had become his signature. Known throughout the kingdom as the Crown's bloodhound, Crowley possessed an unsettling ability to uncover truths that others preferred to keep buried. His pale eyes missed nothing, and his sharp features gave him the appearance of a hunting bird, patient, focused, and utterly without mercy once he had caught the scent of prey. Father, stepmother. Alexander's greeting held formal courtesy but no warmth. Thank you for joining us at this late hour. Marcus took his place on the throne, but Isabel remained standing. Sitting felt like an admission of guilt, though she couldn't say why. You summoned us, Alexander. What matter is so urgent it couldn't wait for morning? Justice rarely keeps civilized hours. Alexander replied, his gaze never leaving her face. Master Crowley has completed his investigation into certain irregularities surrounding the events of 23 years ago. Crowley stepped forward, producing a leather portfolio from beneath his robes. His voice, when he spoke, was as dry and precise as parchment. Your Majesties, I have spent the past 3 months examining the circumstances surrounding Princess Elena's death. What I discovered has necessitated this immediate conference. Isabel felt Marcus tense beside her, but she kept her expression carefully neutral. Princess Elena's death was a tragic accident. This was established beyond doubt at the time. Indeed, the official investigation concluded exactly that, Crowley agreed, opening his portfolio.
However, the passage of time has allowed for a more thorough examination of the evidence.
Evidence that was perhaps overlooked in the grief and chaos following the princess's death. He withdrew a sheaf of papers, each page covered in his meticulous handwriting. I began with the carriage itself. The official report stated that a wheel broke due to wear and poor road conditions. However, examination of the surviving fragments tells a different story. Alexander moved closer to his father's throne, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Tell them what you found, Master Crowley. The wheel did not break from wear, Your Majesty. It was deliberately weakened. Someone had filed through a crucial support strut, leaving just enough metal intact to support the carriage's weight on level ground, but ensuring catastrophic failure on the first steep descent. The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Isabel felt her knees weaken but forced herself to remain upright. That's impossible. Who would do such a thing? That is precisely the question I set out to answer, Crowley continued, his pale eyes fixed on her face. Which led me to examine who had opportunity, means, and motive. Victoria stepped forward, her voice musical but edged with steel. Master Crowley's investigation has been most illuminating. Perhaps you would share your findings about the carriage house records. Crowley nodded, consulting his papers. The carriage house maintains detailed logs of all maintenance and access. On the night before Princess Elena's fatal journey, only 3 people entered the carriage house after the evening inspection. The head groom, the carriage driver, and, he paused dramatically, Lady Isabel Thornwood, as she was then known. That proves nothing. Isabel was Elena's lady-in-waiting. She frequently checked on travel preparations. Indeed, Your Majesty. However, Lady Isabel's presence was unusual for several reasons. First, the head groom reported that she arrived carrying a leather satchel and remained in the carriage house for nearly an hour. Second, she specifically requested that he leave her alone to inspect the interior arrangements for her mistress's comfort. Third, when he returned, she was emerging from beneath the carriage itself, claiming she had dropped a hairpin. Isabel's mouth went dry. She remembered that night with crystal clarity, remembered the terror that had driven her to the carriage house, the desperate plan that had seemed like her only escape from an impossible situation. But the details Crowley recounted were wrong, twisted into something sinister. I was checking on the travel arrangements, she said firmly. Princess Elena was anxious about the journey, and I wanted to ensure everything was perfect for her comfort. Perhaps, Crowley said, withdrawing another document. However, this brings us to the question of motive. What could drive a devoted lady-in-waiting to murder her beloved mistress? Alexander's voice was barely controlled fury. Love. She was in love with my father, and my mother stood in her way. The evidence supports this theory, Crowley continued relentlessly. Palace servants reported observing increasingly intimate conversations between Lady Isabel and His Majesty in the months preceding Princess Elena's death. The Queen herself confided to her personal maid that she was concerned about her husband's growing attachment to her lady-in-waiting. Victoria moved to Alexander's side, placing a supportive hand on his arm. Master Crowley also uncovered correspondence between Lady Isabel and her family from that period, letters expressing her hopelessness about her future, her lack of marriage prospects, and her fear of being dismissed from court service. "I was a young woman uncertain about my future," Isabel protested. "That hardly constitutes evidence of murder." "No," Crowley agreed, "but combined with opportunity and means, it forms a compelling pattern, particularly when we consider the additional evidence." Marcus stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger. "What additional evidence? You're building a case on speculation and coincidence." Crowley's thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. "I refer to the confession, Your Majesty." The word hit the throne room like a thunderbolt. Isabel felt the floor seem to tilt beneath her feet. "Confession? What confession?" 3 days ago, I interviewed Martha Willowbrook, who served as head housemaid during the period in question. Age and illness have loosened her tongue considerably. She revealed something she has kept secret for 23 years. Alexander stepped closer to his stepmother, his eyes blazing with triumph and pain. "Tell her what Martha said." Crowley consulted his papers with theatrical precision. Martha stated that on the morning after Princess Elena's accident, she discovered Lady Isabel burning papers in her private chambers. When questioned, Lady Isabel claimed she was destroying old letters from home. However, Martha glimpsed enough of the burning documents to see they contained detailed drawings of carriage construction and wheel assemblies. Isabel's world began to collapse. The papers she had burned were not evidence of murder. They were something far more personal and damaging. But how could she explain without revealing secrets that would destroy more than just herself? "I'd burned personal documents," she said weakly. "Private matters that had nothing to do with Elena or the accident." More interesting still, Crowley continued, Martha reported that Lady Isabel made an unusual request that morning. She asked for a significant quantity of soap and hot water to clean what appeared to be grease or mechanical residue from her hands and clothing. Victoria's voice cut through the mounting tension. "You had grease on your hands and clothes from tampering with the carriage wheel. The evidence is overwhelming."
Isabel looked at Marcus, seeing the confusion and growing doubt in his eyes.
The man who had loved her, protected her, chosen her above all others, was beginning to question everything he thought he knew. The carefully constructed life they had built together was crumbling, brick by brick, under the weight of circumstantial evidence that painted her as a cold-blooded murderer. "There's more," Alexander said, his voice breaking slightly. "Master Crowley discovered something else in his investigation. Something about the night of my mother's death." "The night Princess Elena died," Crowley said, consulting yet another document. "She spoke privately with Lady Isabel before retiring to her chambers. No one else was present for this conversation, but the princess's personal maid reported that her mistress emerged from the meeting visibly distressed. Elena was always concerned before traveling," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Perhaps Princess Elena had discovered something about her lady-in-waiting's feelings and intentions. Perhaps she confronted Lady Isabel directly. Alexander's composure finally cracked, his voice rising with years of suppressed grief and rage. "Did she know? Did my mother know you were planning to kill her?"
Did she beg you to reconsider? Did she try to reason with a woman she trusted with her life? "Stop," Isabel whispered, the accusations hitting her like physical blows.
"Please, stop. I won't stop until I know the truth," Alexander shouted. "My mother died because you wanted her life, her husband, her crown. You murdered the most beloved queen in our kingdom's history so you could steal her place." The throne room echoed with his accusations, and in the sudden silence that followed, Isabel realized that everyone was staring at her, waiting for her response. Marcus, the man who had loved her for decades. Victoria, the woman who would replace her. Crowley, the investigator who had built his career on uncovering hidden truths. And Alexander, the son whose mother's memory she had lived in the shadow of her entire adult life. "You want the truth?" Isabel said finally, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You want to know what really happened 23 years ago? What I burned in my chambers the morning after Elena died? What caused the grease on my hands and clothes?" She walked to the center of the throne room, standing directly beneath the great chandelier that cast harsh shadows across her face. "I did go to the carriage house that night. I did spend an hour there. And yes, I did crawl under the carriage." Alexander's face lit with vindicated fury. "You admit it. You admit you sabotaged the wheel. I admit I went there to sabotage the wheel, Isabel said quietly, but not to kill your mother. The confession hung in the air, shocking in its honesty. Marcus stared at her as if seeing a stranger, while Crowley made rapid notes in his portfolio. Then why? Alexander demanded. If not to murder her, then why? Isabel closed her eyes, gathering the courage to reveal a secret she had carried for over 2 decades. Because your mother was going to dismiss me from court service. She had discovered my feelings for your father, and she planned to send me away immediately upon her return from the journey. She opened her eyes, meeting each gaze in turn. I was desperate, terrified of losing the only life I had ever known. So I planned to disable the carriage just enough to delay the journey, to give me time to convince her to let me stay, to prove my loyalty and discretion.
You sabotaged the carriage to delay the trip? Victoria's voice held disbelief. I intended to damage a wheel support just enough to cause a breakdown on level ground, nowhere near the mountain pass where the accident occurred.
The carriage was supposed to break down before leaving the palace grounds, require a day or 2 of repairs. I thought, Isabel's voice broke. I thought it would give me time to change her mind. Marcus stood slowly, his face pale with understanding and horror. But you miscalculated. You weakened the wheel too much. I was inexperienced, desperate. I had studied the carriage construction from mechanical texts I stole from the library. Those were the papers I burned. But I had no practical knowledge of structural engineering. I thought I was being careful, precise. Tears began to flow down her cheeks. I never meant for anyone to be hurt. I certainly never meant for Elena to die. Alexander stared at her, his anger transforming into something more complex and painful. You killed my mother by accident. Through incompetence rather than malice. I killed your mother through my own selfish desperation, Isabel corrected. The result is the same. Elena died because of my actions, because I couldn't bear to lose my place in this world. Every day for 23 years I have lived with that knowledge. Every honor I've received as queen, every moment of happiness I've shared with your father has been tainted by the truth of how it began. Crowley looked up from his notes. This confession changes the legal classification of the crime, but not its fundamental nature. Accidental death resulting from criminal sabotage carries severe penalties under kingdom law. What penalties? Marcus asked, though his voice suggested he already knew. Loss of title, forfeiture of all properties and honors, exile from the kingdom, Crowley recited. In cases involving royal family members, execution is also an option at the monarch's discretion. The weight of judgment settled over the throne room like a funeral shroud. Alexander stood frozen, his quest for justice suddenly complicated by the reality of his stepmother's confession. He had wanted to expose her as a murderer. Instead, he had revealed her as a woman whose desperate mistake had destroyed the person she should have protected. Victoria broke the silence, her voice carefully measured. The question now is what justice demands, and what mercy allows. All eyes turned to Marcus, the king who would have to choose between the law and the woman he loved, between justice for his first wife and protection of his second. The man who had spent decades loving a woman he now knew was responsible for his first wife's death. The ring, Alexander said suddenly, his voice hoarse with emotion. The tear of Avalon. You've worn my mother's ring for 23 years, knowing you were responsible for her death. Isabel nodded, reaching up to touch the sapphire at her throat where she wore it on a chain. Every day. As penance. As reminder. As promise that I would try to be worthy of a position I gained through such terrible means. And now? Victoria stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the stone. What happens to the ring now that the truth is known? Isabel unclasped the chain, holding the tear of Avalon up to the light. The sapphire seemed to glow with inner fire, the diamonds surrounding it catching the torchlight like tears. Now it goes where it always belonged, to Elena's son and his chosen bride. She walked to Alexander, extending the ring toward him. I should never have worn it. I should never have accepted the honors and titles that came with your father's love. I should have confessed my crime years ago and accepted whatever punishment the law demanded. Alexander stared at the ring, making no move to take it. Why didn't you? Why keep the secret all these years? Because I was a coward, Isabel said simply, and because I feared that revealing the truth would destroy not just me, but your father, your siblings, the stability of the realm. I told myself I was protecting others, but really I was protecting myself. Marcus descended from his throne, his face etched with pain and conflict. Isabel, don't, she said firmly, still holding the ring toward Alexander. Don't make excuses for me, or try to minimize what I've done. I killed your first wife, through my own selfish actions. I've lived a lie for over 20 years. The only honorable thing left is to accept the consequences and try to make whatever amends are possible. Alexander finally reached out, his fingers closing around the ring. The moment he touched it, something seemed to shift in the throne room, as if Elena's spirit could finally rest, knowing her most precious possession had returned to her bloodline. What amends could possibly be adequate? He asked quietly. Isabel straightened, drawing on reserves of strength she had been building for this moment her entire adult life. I renounce my title as queen. I forfeit all properties and honors granted through my marriage. I submit myself to whatever judgment you deem appropriate as the crown prince and Elena's son. And I? Marcus's voice was broken. What becomes of the king who unknowingly honored his wife's killer for over 2 decades? The question hung in the air, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. In seeking justice for his mother, Alexander had uncovered a truth that threatened to destroy everything his family had built. The ring in his hand felt heavy as a crown, weighted with the responsibility of deciding not just Isabel's fate, but the future of the kingdom itself. As the candles burned lower and the shadows grew longer, 4 people stood in the throne room of Ravensholm Palace, each wrestling with the terrible complexity of justice, mercy, love, and betrayal. The tear of Avalon had revealed its secrets at last, but the price of truth was higher than anyone had imagined. Dawn was breaking over Ravensholm Palace as the 4 figures remained locked in their terrible tableau of revelation and judgment. The throne room, which had witnessed centuries of royal decisions, had never held a moment quite like this one, where love and justice stood in such stark opposition that no choice seemed possible without devastating consequences. Alexander held the Tear of Avalon in his palm, its weight somehow greater than its actual size. The ring that had symbolized royal legitimacy now felt like a burden of impossible decisions. He looked at his stepmother, seeing not the woman who had raised his younger siblings with fierce devotion, not the queen who had guided the kingdom through plague and famine, but the desperate girl who had made a choice that killed his mother. 23 years, he said finally, his voice hollow. 23 years of mourning a mother I believe died by cruel chance, while her killer sat at family dinners, attended state functions, wore her crown. Isabel did not flinch from his gaze. Yes. Do you have any idea what that knowledge does to a person? To learn that every kindness you showed me, every moment of maternal care, was built on the foundation of matricide? Alexander. Marcus stepped forward, but his son raised a hand to stop him.
No, father.
You've been deceived as much as I have. Perhaps more, because you loved her while she kept this secret from you. Alexander's voice cracked with the weight of his pain. Did you ever suspect, in all these years, did any part of you wonder? Marcus aged a decade in the space of a heartbeat. I suspected she carried guilt about something. She would wake some nights from terrible dreams, speaking Elena's name. But I thought it was natural, survivor's guilt, the pain of losing someone she had served so devotedly. Devoted, Alexander repeated bitterly. She was devoted enough to kill her. It was an accident, Isabel said quietly. That doesn't absolve me, but it matters for the sake of truth.
Victoria, who had remained silent through this exchange, stepped closer to Alexander.
Her voice was gentle but firm. What matters now is what we do with this truth. The kingdom cannot survive a scandal of this magnitude, not with the political pressures we're already facing. She was right, and everyone in the room knew it. The realm stood at a delicate crossroads, with Parliament growing bolder in their demands for reform, and neighboring kingdoms watching for any sign of weakness. A royal murder trial would shatter the crown's authority and likely lead to civil unrest. Are you suggesting we cover this up? Alexander asked, his tone dangerous. Pretend justice doesn't matter because it's inconvenient?
I'm suggesting we consider all the consequences of our actions. Victoria replied.
Your mother is beyond our help, but the kingdom still needs protection. Your siblings still need their family intact. Sometimes true justice isn't about punishment, it's about preventing further harm. Master Crowley had remained silent during this exchange, but now he cleared his throat delicately. If I may, Your Highness, there are legal precedents for this situation. The doctrine of royal mercy allows for creative solutions when traditional justice would harm the realm's stability. Alexander turned on him sharply. You want me to show mercy to my mother's killer? I want you to consider what your mother would have wanted, Crowley replied. By all accounts, Princess Elena was a woman of extraordinary compassion. Would she want her death to destroy the family she left behind? Don't you dare speak for my mother. Then let me speak for her. Isabel said, moving to stand directly before Alexander. Because I knew Elena better than anyone here except your father. I saw her kindness, her wisdom, her fierce love for her family and kingdom. She reached into her dress and withdrew a folded piece of parchment, yellowed with age. Elena wrote this letter the day before she died. She gave it to me with instructions to deliver it only if something happened to her. I've carried it for 23 years, never opening it because I was too ashamed to read final words from the woman I was planning to betray. Marcus stared at the letter in shock. Elena left a letter? Why didn't you? Because reading it would have meant admitting she was truly gone, and because I feared what it might contain. Isabel's hands trembled as she held out the parchment, but perhaps now is the time for all secrets to be revealed. Alexander took the letter with the reverence one might show a religious relic. The wax seal bore his mother's personal crest, a dove carrying an olive branch. With infinite care, he broke the seal and unfolded the parchment. Elena's handwriting, still legible after more than 2 decades, filled the page in her characteristic flowing script. Alexander's eyes moved across the words, and as he read, his expression shifted from anger to confusion to something approaching wonder. "Read it aloud," Marcus said hoarsely. "Please." Alexander's voice was barely steady as he began. "My dearest Isabel, if you are reading this letter, then my worst fears have been realized and I am no longer with my family. I know this may seem strange, but recent dreams and a growing sense of foreboding have convinced me that my time grows short. I write to you because you are the person I trust most in this world, beyond my husband and son. You have served me with loyalty and love, and I have watched you struggle with feelings you believe you must hide. Please know that I have seen how you look at Marcus, and more importantly, how he has begun to look at you. Do not torment yourself with guilt over these feelings. Love is not something we can control, and I would rather know my husband might find comfort with someone who truly cares for him than see him consumed by grief should anything happen to me. If I am gone, and if Marcus turns to you for solace, do not refuse him out of misplaced loyalty to my memory. Accept his love, marry him if he asks, and help him raise our son with the kindness and wisdom I have seen you show to everyone in your care. You may think yourself unworthy of such a position, but I have watched you these past years. You have a good heart, a sharp mind, and the strength to be a fine queen. More importantly, you have the capacity to love my family as your own, and that is worth more than any noble bloodline. I know the court will whisper, will question your worthiness, will compare you to me in ways that will cause you pain. Ignore them. Be yourself. Trust in Marcus's love, and know that you have my blessing. Care for Alexander as if he were your own son. He will resist you at first. His grief will make him suspicious of any woman who tries to take what he sees as his mother's place. Be patient with him. Love him without reservation. Eventually he will see what I have always seen in you, a woman capable of extraordinary devotion and sacrifice. If you are reading this, then I am at peace, knowing my family will be protected by someone who loves them. Do not grieve for me overmuch. Live fully, love completely, and never doubt that you have my eternal gratitude and blessing. With deepest affection and trust, Elena. Silence filled the throne room as the words settled over them like a benediction. Alexander stared at the letter, his worldview shaking apart and reforming with each revelation. His mother had not only known about Isabel's feelings, she had blessed them. She knew, he whispered. She knew, and she approved. More than that, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. She planned for it. She wanted Isabel to take her place. Victoria moved to Alexander's side, reading over his shoulder. Your mother was remarkably prescient. Everything she predicted came to pass. The court's whispers, your resistance, Isabel's eventual acceptance as queen and mother. Alexander looked up at Isabel, his anger transforming into something far more complex. You sabotaged the carriage to prevent a journey where my mother was planning to dismiss you, but she was only going to dismiss you because she wanted to clear the way for your future relationship with my father. I didn't know, Isabel said desperately. If I had known her true intentions, if I had understood.
You would never have gone to the carriage house, Alexander finished.
You would have accepted your dismissal as Elena's will and waited for whatever came next. Yes, and your mother would still be alive. The cruel irony of it hung between them like a sword. Elena had died because Isabel tried to prevent the very thing Elena wanted to happen. In trying to preserve her place in the palace, Isabel had destroyed the woman who was secretly planning to give her everything she desired. This changes everything, Victoria said softly. The legal circumstances, the moral considerations, the question of justice itself. Master Crowley nodded thoughtfully. The princess's letter establishes clear evidence of her consent to the subsequent marriage and succession. It transforms the crime from one of calculated murder to a tragic misunderstanding with fatal consequences. It doesn't bring my mother back, Alexander said, but the raw fury had left his voice, replaced by exhausted grief. No, Isabel agreed. Nothing can do that, but perhaps it allows us to honor her memory by following her wishes rather than being consumed by the hatred she explicitly warned against. Marcus approached his son, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Your mother was wiser than any of us realized. She saw the future we couldn't imagine and tried to guide us toward it, even in her final days. Alexander closed his eyes. Elena's letter still clutched in his hands. What would she want me to do now? How do I honor her memory while acknowledging the truth of her death?
Perhaps, Victoria suggested carefully, the answer lies not in punishment, but in understanding.
Your stepmother has lived with this guilt for over 20 years. She has dedicated her life to serving the kingdom and family she inadvertently harmed. Isn't that a form of penance? Is it enough? Alexander opened his eyes, looking directly at Isabel. Is 23 years of guilt and service enough to balance my mother's life? Isabel met his gaze steadily. Nothing could ever be enough, but if you'll permit it, I would like to spend whatever years remain to me trying to make amends. Not as queen. That title belongs to Victoria now. But as whatever you'll allow me to be. Alexander held up the Tear of Avalon, watching the dawn light set its depths on fire. My mother wanted this ring to go to her son's bride. She wanted the succession to pass smoothly, the kingdom to remain stable, the family to heal from whatever losses they might face. He looked at Victoria, then at his father, finally settling his gaze on Isabel. She also wanted mercy, understanding, and love to guide our decisions rather than anger and vengeance. What are you saying? Marcus asked. Alexander extended the ring toward Victoria, but spoke to Isabel. I'm saying that I will honor my mother's final wishes. The ring goes to my bride, as Elena intended. The succession proceeds according to her blessing. But you, he paused, struggling with words that would reshape all their lives. You will keep your title as Dowager Queen. You will retain your place in this family. Not because your crime was minor, but because my mother's love was greater than your guilt. Isabel stared at him in shock. Alexander, I don't deserve. Deserve has nothing to do with it. Alexander interrupted. This is about what my mother wanted, what the kingdom needs, what our family can survive. You made a terrible mistake that cost my mother her life. But you've also been the mother she asked you to be, the queen she trusted you to become, the woman she believed could love us all without reservation.
He placed the ring in Victoria's palm, but continued speaking to Isabel.
Elena's final gift to all of us was the wisdom to choose love over hatred, healing over vengeance. If I ignore that gift to pursue justice as I define it, I dishonor her memory more than you ever could. Victoria slipped the ring onto her finger where it fit as perfectly as if it had been made for her. The Tear of Avalon seemed to glow with approval, finally resting where Elena had always intended. What of the investigation? Crowley asked. Master Benedict's findings? Alexander turned to the investigator. Your investigation revealed the truth we needed to hear, Master Crowley, but that truth serves the crown better as a family secret than as a public scandal. Your discretion in this matter will be appreciated. Crowley bowed deeply. Of course, Your Highness. Some truths are meant to guide private decisions rather than public judgment. As the sunrise painted the throne room in shades of gold and rose, the four people who had entered in anger and suspicion found themselves united by a dead woman's wisdom. Elena's letter had transformed accusation into understanding, vengeance into mercy, division into a strange new form of family bond. Marcus approached Isabel, taking her hands in his. Can you forgive an old fool who doubted you? Can you forgive a woman who kept such a terrible secret for so long? We've both carried burdens that were too heavy for one person to bear, Marcus replied. Perhaps it's time to share them. Alexander watched his father and stepmother reconcile, feeling the last of his anger drain away. The woman who had killed his mother was also the woman who had raised his siblings, guided the kingdom, and loved his father with unwavering devotion. Elena had known this complexity was possible and had trusted them all to navigate it with wisdom rather than hatred. There will be conditions, he said finally, terms that honor my mother's memory while acknowledging what happened. Name them. Right. The technical founder of my mother's name, detail, and tested. Why this past decision is out there, decided Wyke. Name them. How long is the system? Done. Second, you will commission a memorial garden where my mother's carriage overturned. A place of peace and remembrance, where people can honor loved ones lost to accidents.
Of course, Bird. Alexander's voice grew softer. You will help me know my mother better.
Share your memories of her. Tell me stories I've never heard. Help me understand the woman she was beyond the legend she became. Tears flowed freely down Isabel's cheeks.
That would be an honor. Victoria stepped forward, the Terror of Avalon gleaming on her hand.
And I would be grateful for your guidance as I prepare to become queen.
Elena chose you as her successor for good reason. I hope you'll help me live up to her example. As the sun rose fully over Ravensholm Palace, the terrible crisis that had threatened to destroy a family instead forged new bonds of understanding. Elena's final letter had proven more powerful than any investigation, more healing than any confession, more just than any punishment. The Tear of Avalon had found its destined bearer, but more importantly, it had revealed the truth its original owner wanted them to find. That love, mercy, and forgiveness were stronger forces than guilt, anger, and vengeance. In the years that followed, the kingdom would remember Queen Elena as the woman whose wisdom guided her family even in death. The foundation established in her name would prevent countless tragedies, the memorial garden would bring comfort to thousands of mourners, and her son would rule with a compassion that reflected her teachings. And Isabel, the Dowager Queen who had killed her predecessor through desperate accident and honored her memory through devoted service, would finally find the peace that had eluded her for 23 years. Not through forgiveness she didn't deserve, but through the understanding that Elena's love had been great enough to encompass even the woman who inadvertently destroyed her. The Tear of Avalon would pass through generations of queens, each one guided by Elena's example and protected by the truth that sometimes the greatest courage lies not in seeking justice, but in choosing mercy. The sapphire shadow had lifted at last, replaced by the clear light of dawn and the promise of healing that comes when secrets are finally laid to rest.